Puerto Rico's Center for Investigative Journalism also estimated that 1,065 more people than usual had died in September and October of 2017 than in the same period in 2016 and 2015. Methods for tolling the number of storm-related deaths vary by state and locality. The Times points out that some places only count direct deaths, such as people who drown in storm floodwaters. But Puerto Rico's method is less rigid, and deaths indirectly caused by a storm, such as suicides or death by infection, are included in the tally. What they're saying this is about more than numbers, these are real people, leaving behind loved ones and families, Rosello said in a statement. Rosello had previously repeatedly defended Puerto Rico's counting method. The Times suggests the recount is an apparent about-face for his administration, as they couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that the toll does not accurately depict reality. What's next? The recount will require interviewing doctors and family members of the dead to learn whether their cause of death could have been linked to the fallout from the storm. For example, a heart attack may have been brought on by the stress of the hurricane, or roads leading to the hospital may have been blocked by debris. Go deeper. One third of Puerto Rico still doesn't have power. Why it matters. The new rules were added to cover areas the social media company has historically struggled to manage, such as Twitter accounts affiliated with organizations that promote hate and violence, or those accounts glorifying a violent actor figure. This has been a growing issue this year as individuals and groups identifying with white supremacy have become more active and visible on Twitter. Yes, but Twitter's real test will be in how it enforces these. The company has long had rules against certain types of conduct, yet users complained for years that accounts reported as clearly violating those rules were ultimately allowed to remain, or that Twitter responded too slowly. All the tech is great. All the products are great. But people worry about them. Shum, speaking to Axios after a San Francisco event last week. What they're doing. Shum says Microsoft has established an internal advisory committee on AI ethics and wants to be a leader in an industry-wide discussion on the subject. The big picture. It's not fears of robot overlords that Shum says he is worried about. It's really about practical implications of AI technology, he says, noting the biggest risks come from issues like algorithmic bias, poor training data and other oversights. Some other highlights from our discussion on whether regulation is needed. It's unclear to me how quickly regulators should come on. I think it's really the industry. Other big tech companies like us should lead the way. Onte, Microsoft's first English-language chatbot, which quickly turned into a racist. It was the first time, maybe, hopefully the only time, I wrote a letter to whole company to apologize. It was our fault. Many people asked inside and outside the company, why didn't you have this problem with your Chinese chatbot, your Japanese chatbot? Every society is different. We should have had that sensibility. President Trump promised success for the GOP in next year's midterm elections in a morning tweet, glossing over his party's failures in November's Virginia gubernatorial race and last week's Alabama special Senate election. Don't forget Trump issued full-throated endorsements of both Gillespie and Moore in the respective races. And Trump's also forgetting a Democratic win in a congressional race, California's 34th district, though it wasn't even contested by the GOP. Backstory: founded in 2014 as Hyperloop One, the company's technology is based on plans for a high-speed, tube-based transportation system released by Elon Musk the prior year. This past summer it announced 2 successful tests, although they still only reached a fraction of the near 700 miles per hour it eventually hopes to achieve. In the summer of 2016, the company parted ways with one of its co-founders and a few other employees after a dispute led to a legal battle. A number of other startups, including Musk's Boring Company, also are working on Hyperloop. The company rebranded as Virgin Hyperloop One following a recent investment from Virgin Group, through which Richard Branson took a regular board seat. Branson's new agreement to become chairman was key to obtaining the financing, per a source. One of the co-chairs he replaces is Shervin Pesheva, who resigned from the board following sexual harassment allegations unrelated to the company. The new money comes from 2 existing investors, Russia's Caspian Venture Capital and Dubai's DP World. Not only does the deal let Virgin Hyperloop One stay afloat, but it also helps the company maintain ties in 2 geographic regions, Russia and the Middle East, where it would like to sign contracts in 2018. Virgin Hyperloop One did not return requests for comment. How it works: Facebook will demote these types of spammy posts that bait engagement. To do so, it's assigned teams to review and categorize hundreds of thousands of posts that can better inform a machine learning model to detect when pages post things just for the like, share or comment. Facebook also says that in the coming weeks it will apply stricter demotions in the news feed for pages that repeatedly use engagement bait to artificially game the algorithm. The tech giant warned that publishers that use engagement bait tactics should expect their reach on these posts to decrease. Some exceptions include posts that ask people for help, advice, or recommendations, such as circulating a missing child report, or raising money for a cause. IEA projects that U.S. production will be around 510 million tons of coal equivalent in 2022, around the same as current levels. Demand declines around 1% annually, but the U.S. remains a swing supplier in global markets. The U.S. industry's mood has brightened and some new production projects were announced in 2017, but that said, sluggish power demand, abundant gas supply and renewables growth are expected to continue to generate headwinds for coal use and limit the prospects for any resurgence in construction of new coal power plants, IEA notes. Big picture global coal consumption is forecast to see very small growth of around 0.5% annually through 2022, while it loses ground slightly as a share of global energy supply as other sources are tapped to meet rising demand. Overall, coal's share of worldwide power generation specifically is expected to be slightly under 36% in 2022, which is the lowest percentage since IEA began compiling statistics over 40 years ago. Coal use in China, by far the world's largest coal consumer, peaked in 2013 and declines very slightly during the 5-year analysis period, while India sees the largest increase in absolute terms as its coal-fired power generation is predicted to grow 4% annually through 2022. Go deeper. A detailed summary of the report is available here. Taxpayers for Common Sense, a non-partisan think tank, tallied up nearly $50 billion worth of subsidies going mostly to the fossil fuel sectors over 10 years that were kept intact. These subsidies, which have been in the tax code for decades, include an accounting measure for oil, natural gas and coal known as lasting first out and a percentage depletion allowance for oil and gas, according to the list compiled by the group and shared with Axios. Congress may also pass a separate bill extending another round of subsidies, including those in the energy industry. The group says it had backed the approach initially proposed by Republican leaders on the House Tax Committee that would have started with a blank slate with all subsidies for energy and other industries, where everything is out and then must be deliberately put back in and paid for, says Autumn Hanna, Senior Program Director at the Taxpayers Group. This bill, however, went in with a scalpel and carved out only a few things. In light of that approach, lobbyists from clean energy industries have been scrambling to ensure the scalpel didn't go after their more recently approved subsidies either. Subsidies for wind $24 billion, solar $12 billion and electric car $4.4 billion over 5 years were not cut in the final legislation alongside the fossil fuel subsidies. Earlier proposals had curtailed the wind subsidy and scrapped altogether the electric car subsidy. The wind and solar subsidies are set to expire in the coming years, based off a 2015 law. Subsidies versus carbon tax. The upshot to all of these energy subsidies is best described as the opposite of a tax on carbon emissions. Congress is paying billions of dollars in tax credits for clean energy while doing nothing to put a monetary price on the climate change impact of fossil fuels. In fact, it's sustaining subsidies for those industries too. A carbon tax is controversial for several reasons, including what to do with the revenue raised. Quiet efforts are underway to build political support for a carbon tax, but it's not likely to happen anytime soon. In a perfect world, you would tax the thing you want less of and provide a revenue to the Treasury, instead of crediting clean energy and draining the Treasury, says David Brown, a lobbyist for Exelon, the nation's largest operator of nuclear power plants, which don't emit carbon. From an economic perspective, it's not ideal. From a political perspective, it may be as good as it gets. Exelon is pushing a proposal to create a new tax credit that would cost nearly $5 billion over the next 4 years. Brown says his company supports a carbon tax but isn't pushing for one because of the high political hurdles. Exelon's tax credit proposal faces long odds of passing, though it has slightly better odds than a separate, $65 billion coal tax credit proposal because nuclear's carbon-free profile garners it bipartisan backing. Adele Morris, an economist at the Brookings Institution who recently hosted an event about a carbon tax that I spoke at, says a carbon tax achieves two things on top of raising government revenue: that subsidies don't transition from dirtier energy technologies to cleaner ones. Energy conservation through higher prices. There's no way to mirror the market outcomes of a carbon tax with some portfolio of subsidies because you're not going to be producing that same incentive to conserve energy, Morris says. What's next? The fight over a carbon tax is likely to pick up next year. The Center on Global Energy Policy, a think tank at Columbia University, is launching a series of reports and events focused on how to design a carbon tax and what implications could come from one. Separately, the Climate Leadership Council, a coalition of oil and gas executives and conservative political leaders from prior Republican administrations, is working to build support among congressional Republicans and others for a carbon tax where the revenue goes back to consumers in the form of monthly dividend checks. Tom Pyle, who heads the American Energy Alliance, a conservative energy advocacy group, is opposed to that plan, along with most subsidies and environmental regulations. His group is evaluating the impacts of it, though he wouldn't offer more details on when his group would announce anything about its work. You can expect something public on the matter early next year.